which is great. Okay, let's make a start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural FTF Agents Association UK and Ireland meeting. My name's Ryan McKnight, and it's absolutely fantastic to have everybody on the call this afternoon. I'm joined, of course, by Tony Sharkey. Tony, good afternoon. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Ryan. Really pleased with the uptake we've had for this first meeting. Uh, Slightly nervous, actually, starting on a new venture. Hopefully we'll get plenty of support from the guys.
Well, you look tremendously smart, Tony. You've been doing it a long time. There's no need to be nervous, and
Yeah,
I'm here to help.
I don't normally wear a tie, Ryan. It's only when it's a big meeting or it's something important, I wear a tie. So if I've got a tie on, it must be
Yeah,
important.
it must be a foot. Okay. Bit of housekeeping before we get into it. The chat box is open if anybody's got any general comments, anything that they want to react to, what they hear from over the next. Well, we've got it down for a couple of hours, but we'll see. We'll see how we go. We might be done before that. If anybody's got any specific questions, if you could put it in the Q&A box, that will make my life much easier, and we'll make sure that everybody's questions get answered. If you want to do a bit of networking whilst we're on the call, in terms of putting your LinkedIn address or anything like that in the chat box, go for it. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. Tony, we've got a bit to get through over the next couple of hours. We've got lots of content to introduce the Agents Association, the FTF Football Agents Association, and we've got a couple of guests on as well, don't we?
Yeah, I'm really delighted to have two really great guests on this sort of first meeting. So the first one's Roberto Branco Martins, who's a sports lawyer based in Holland. We've done a lot of work with Roberto over the years, and he's going to talk about representing agents. He's been doing that for a long time. And then we've got Dan Plumley, who is a lecturer at Sheffield University, but he's our sort of football finance guru, isn't he? He's been at some of our events, and he paints a picture of what the transfer window will look like. Dan famously predicted the deals done before the 30th of June to avoid PSR punishments, which was, yeah, spot on. So we look forward to Dan later on in the meeting. And I think that's going to be a flavour of the meetings. We're going to have some insights. We're going to have some good guests on as we go forward.
Fantastic. Excellent. Right, let's get into it again, Tony. And you're going to give us really just a bit of background on really why we're having this call today, and why we've gone about forming the FTF Agents Association.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's something I've been sort of contemplating for some time, really, setting up an agents association, and I think now the timing just seems to be right. But before, I mean, I sort of first got into football agency, 23 years ago. And I think the first person to sort of connect agents together was the late Mel Steen. And I've got to commend and celebrate Mel Steen, because Mel did get the agents together. I remember a couple of meetings in London early on, not many people in the room, some quite robust arguments as well in the room. But he managed to bring people together. And I think he gave us a voice. I was going to say a voice in the industry, or a seat at the table. And Mel, for me, Mel is really missed. So I'd like to sort of pick up that baton from Mel, and and I'd like to start with a football agency in this country and, working across the UK and Ireland. I think in my 23 years as a football agent, we've seen lots of change, and there'll be agents on here who've been doing it a long time. There's been several different rules and regulation changes over the years. Obviously, right now we're all still reeling from FIFA's imposition of the FAR document, the football agent regulations, without any real consultation. Thankfully we have some clarity in England, but for me the picture is still blurred. I thought we were going to have some more clarity from the European Court of Justice last week, but that doesn't seem to be coming for another few months. I think the lawyers are better placed than I am to talk about that. And we also had last July, it was a bit of a random email just in the transfer window, an email from the FA sending it out from the Employment Agency Standards, the EAS, who wrote to agents last July, and they were talking about, do agents, are they covered by regulations, employment, sort of the Employment Act, and acting as a sort of recruitment agency. We've yet to hear anything further from those people. And then, Ryan, I know you were particularly vociferous about the independent regulator bill. We've got that going through Parliament at the moment. I've heard some negative sentiment about football agents around that bill, and sort of how will that sort of affect us? So there's lots of issues. You get the sort of picture. There's a lot of things going on. And for me, I've struggled to know where to go to get, to find that information and to find out what's happening in our profession. Did you want to say anything about the independent regulator bill, Ryan?
Well, I don't think it's been as engaging as it should have been, and certainly football agents have not been engaged. That's extremely
Yeah.
clear. And I think in terms of how the original white paper was put together, the groups that were involved in putting that together was extremely one-sided. It's not surprising that we've seen pushback. We're now seeing the Conservatives change tact on their position on it as well. But look, hey, it doesn't matter whether it's the regulation around football or whether it's regulation about any other walk of life. If you don't engage all of the stakeholders, that's part of the conversation, then you're always going to come up against issues. And ultimately, for me, I think, and you rightly said, it's about picking up the baton from what has gone on before. Tony, it's about recognizing that agents and football agency in this country, in Great Britain and Ireland, United Kingdom and Ireland, it is a stakeholder within the game. And if you list the other stakeholders that exist in the game, whether it's the PFA, the LMA, the FSA, all of these, there's no doubt in that agents and agency are a stakeholder in the game, but there's been a vacuum, hasn't there, for a body to collate those views together.
Yeah, it seems to be. And I think the good news is, though, that if we do stick together and organize as a strong group, we can present a united front. We can engage with these agencies, these other organizations. I understand we've got the FA and the English FA and the Scottish FA watching, looking on this webinar today. So that's a really good start for us. I think a really positive start. And I'd like to have a positive dialogue and foster a really positive relationship with those guys. And I think that's important. I also think that we can, advocate for agents generally. And I think there's been a long-held negative perception of agents. And I think there's people out there who just do not understand the role of the agent. and our vital place in the industry. And quite frankly, Ryan, they need to be educated. I think it was Jonathan Barnett who said, nobody from FIFA's ever come into my offices and asked me what I actually do, and seen our organization for firsthand. And that's just one example. There's hundreds and hundreds of examples in the industry where people assume that they know how the agent business works, and it's far from reality.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so look, being an agent can be challenging and isolating at times. The other things that I see as potential advantages of the FTF Agents Association will be the advice, support, insight, and networking opportunities, which I think will benefit everybody involved. So look, Ryan, I mean, we're happy to kickstart it, but me and you are not going to do it all on our own, are we? Do you know what I mean? We're sort of looking to build a team of experienced people who can help us, drive it forward.
Absolutely. I think this is what it's all about. So we've put together some aims for the association, which I'll share now. And look, this is just very much a sort of starting point in terms of what we want to achieve, but really to build on what Tony just said there, it's not about myself and Tony, and we'll talk more about how we want people to get involved. It's about having a real positive impact for agency in this country. And so, we've listed these 5 aims of the association: to present a united front to stakeholders in the game on issues facing agents. And as Tony's just touched on, there's lots of issues currently facing agents, and no doubt in the future as well. Develop a good working relationship with all 5 member associations. It's worth saying, in terms of that construct of how we've built the original structure of this association to include Ireland. There are so many, obviously, historic and current interactions and roots and relationships that bind all those member associations together. So it was only right and proper that all 5 were included. To ultimately get the association, recognised as a stakeholder in its own right as well, and really to be of service to those associations as well, Tony. I think it will be an advantage to those associations to have a body on issues relating to agency, to either check the temperature on or to gauge members' opinions. Do you agree?
I mean, it's a long time ago, Ryan, but I remember the FA putting on a couple of conferences to bring the agents together to explain some of the rules and regulations to build, foster that relationship. Really, I'm not suggesting the guys from the FA are probably going, "Oh, we don't organise a conference, Tony," but it's that sort of thing that further along the line we'll look at doing.
Yeah. We want to be able to sort of foster positive relations with leagues, clubs, and service and product providers as well. There are a lot of companies out there that are providing services into the industry, into agents, and of course, leagues and clubs are at the absolute heart of everything that agents do as well. Point 4, provide education and awareness to members. This is something that really Tony and I have really been kind of leading on for the last few years now, in terms of having our finger on the pulse and being able to share what is going on in the world of football, and in the world, specifically in the world of football agency, and this is very much about increasing the volume that we do that as well. And then finally, something that I think everybody will be supportive of, and it's promoting best practice. Going back to the sort of changes of regulations, I think on the whole, Tony, people were in favour of the exam coming back, because ultimately at the heart of that, the good operators in the game are happy to see best practice improved. And they want the people that are providing best practice to be rewarded, and those that are not, to have those barriers put up there.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, there was so much in FIFA's football agent regulations, and my feeling was they should have started small and expanded and got. There was a lot of positivity around some of the aspects of the FIFA football agent regulations. The exam was broadly supported by agents to bring it back. I don't know whether this format of how it is and how it looks is the ideal format, and certainly they've set themselves a challenge by changing how it's going to be administered in the next one, which is I think the 21st of June. But there are some good things. It's not all bad things in there. There's some good things in the FIFA football agent regs. So it's not throwing everything out, but we'd like to have had some more consultation on it for sure. And it always strikes me as odd that the football agents working group was formed after they'd done the football agent regulations. It was almost like putting the cart before the horse, So, but let's see. I mean, those are more issues for the next meeting and the meeting after that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Are we going to do a poll, Tony?
Well, I noticed Roberto's on the call,
Brilliant.
so let's bring Roberto in because I know his time is precious and he's logging in from Holland, I believe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Roberto. Yeah, how are you, Roberto?
Yeah, I'm okay. Oh, so there's no image.
Ah, well.
Good.
Let's see. Oh, we want to see. Yeah. Can you sort that, Ryan?
I don't think I can. We might if you might just need to upgrade Roberto.
In the sense of?
Yeah,
Oh, no. No, I think that's for us, I think. Just hold on.
Well, if not, I can speak, no worries. Wait 1 second.
Oh, here we go.
Have you sorted it, Ryan, or not?
You should be able to.
Let's go with it as we are, Roberto.
Oh, I think it worked.
Yeah.
To be honest, let me see. Now I can start the video.
All right, okay.
Yes. Okay, I'm here.
Excellent.
Ah, hi.
Oh, turn it off. Turn it off.
He's a
Good to see you
good-looking
all.
guy, isn't he? He's a good-looking guy.
I just put my clothes back on, So. Actually, I'm on a couple of days off, but still work continues, and this isn't work, so I'm quite happy to see you all.
Oh.
So yeah, first, well, Tony, maybe you want to.
Yeah, I mean, Roberto, you've been working with agents and agent groups for many, many years now. You're the sort of people I go to for my information and getting knowledge, and obviously you're based in Holland and you lecture there as well. Just give us a bit of your view of where we are, the landscape that we currently exist in. Just not the whole thing, just where we are at the moment.
Now, when it comes to, thank you, Tony, thank you, Ryan, and well, welcoming also this initiative. I think every initiative that gathers agents is a good one, and I think that from a more holistic perspective, we should quit with all the ideas to move in opposite directions, because if we continue to do that, it will be detrimental for the role of the agent. So any development that gathers the voice of agents is also a strengthening of the role of the agent. I will elaborate about that in a bit. No, maybe actually just now. What I've seen in all these years, working on agent representation and defending the interest of the collective voice of agents, is that unfortunately for many sports governing bodies, the European Court of Justice and other tribunals in the world have pointed out that the way sports governing bodies govern their sports in an autonomous way has been curtailed in the sense that they can't take decisions anymore without having proper consultation of relevant stakeholders. For me, after many years, I really welcomed the various, and obviously the European Court of Justice, so a little bit, outside the territory that you're representing now, but I think it's still relevant because FIFA, UEFA, we're all still a member of that. Those court cases, they pointed out that the autonomy has limits. So where regulations have been made having an impact on agents, now the voice of the agents really need to be heard for those regulations to be enforceable. Let's put it like that. We've seen in recent cases, not only the DRA case, but with the Super League case, the Royal Antwerp case, and the International Skating Union case, that, and I think for football, the Super League might be the most interesting one, that indeed there is a sort of a protection that is necessary for the sport in general in Europe, and football is the main sport, obviously. But there's no carte blanche for sports governing bodies to do whatever they want and them being outside of the laws. And if you look at agents, then it's a peculiar little grouping within the football family. Let's put it like that. You're in the football family when the sports governing body wants you to be in the football family, but you're kicked out just as hard when they consider that something needs to be done and your voice should not be heard. So agents have an interesting role in that because, as we've seen also in a court case of 2005, agents are seen by general laws or by policymakers as service providers. So they have a foot in professional football or in football in general, and they have a foot in being the general consultant where the normal regulations that apply to any other consultant or service provider or intermediary apply to agents. So it's an interesting situation to see that these sports governing bodies can't use their autonomy to the extent that they curtail your activities. We know now that there are many cases that have been brought before national civil courts in relation to the FIFA football agent regulations. And one case is currently, there was a hearing last week, and one case is currently at the European Court of Justice for some preliminary questions in relation to FIFA's ability in general to regulate agents. All the other cases of other countries have been paused up until the outcome of that case. Yeah. And I think we can be quite certain, also taking into consideration the opinion of the Advocate General in other cases, and opinions and outcomes in other cases, that the regulations, the FIFA football regulations, as they are now, currently suspended, but the text as it is now, will not be able to enter into force completely. So I see a review of those regulations coming up, and that can't be done without the voice of the agents. So I think this development is quite interesting. I do have to say,
And Roberto, do you think the FIFA football agent working group is going to be a real, is going to help that consultation, or do you think they need to go further?
They need to go further. The FIFA football agent working group, I think it's still you have to be positive in a way. Obviously, it's good that there is something created for agents within FIFA, and I'm not a fan of continuously bashing FIFA, because obviously they have a role in football. Let's be absolutely clear about that. And I think that it becomes a little bit difficult when there's a friction between the governing body and other issues that happen in normal life, let's put it like that, or normal economic sectors. But taking that into consideration, I think the FIFA football agents working group is a working group, again, within the structure of FIFA. So I think it's a good source for having discussions about potential direction of rules, but it's in no way representative for agents in general. So I really believe that there should be an objective organization, and from my perspective, ideally a global organization representing the interests of all the agents, to really be a counterweight to FIFA. Moreover, I wouldn't say even counterweight. I think that in the coming time will become clear that there's no counterweight. They should actually take the lead in certain discussions and have FIFA in a parallel way look at those developments and to see if there's synchronization possible of both intentions.
And when do you think the ECJ, as a rough guess, when do you think they'll decide on the FIFA case?
If I'm correct, there will be now an opinion of the Advocate General. I think that will take 3 to 4 months, if I'm correct. And then we already know quite certain, with quite amount of certainty, what direction the court will judge eventually. And that will take, I think, between 6 to 8 months. Then we have a final decision. But with the opinion of the Advocate General coming up, I believe that all the agents in the world already should be ready and should be gung-ho to work on the route for potential new regulations, ideally with other stakeholders involved as well.
Great, thanks, Roberto. Do you, just in terms of, you know, there are a number of associations around, and we are, you know, fairly new to the party. What do you think is the best the best way forward in terms of opening up our association, you know, wider? Because we've got a lot of people who are based in the UK and Ireland, and also a lot of people who are registered. And I think there's there's people from right across Europe, South America, wherever, who are also registered. And that, you know, that sort of two-tier structure of, you've got to have your FIFA agent license, but then we all thought it was just going to be one license and you could work worldwide. But it's certainly not the case. It seems to be that you still have to register in almost every other country.
Yeah, well, I think that the FIFA license should be the basic entry level in every country, to be honest. But again, you know, and this is an example why it's all practically impossible for a sports governing body to autonomously regulate everything around the world, because we are dealing with an area that is in the crossroads between sports specificity on the one hand and just being another consultancy job, intermediation job like any other. You know, I don't mean it. I mean it in the practical sense. You know, from a legal perspective, obviously, you see that national governments are actually able to create policy on those specific issues. You know, I have the clear-cut example always from the Netherlands. You know, which is close to home, obviously, where a football player is a worker, and we have national legislation. And I think many other countries also have that legislation because it's an international convention based. We have national legislation saying that a player who's a worker is not allowed to pay for his own intermediation when an agent brings him to a club. So that's already quite peculiar if you look at other countries where they're actually pushing to have the client pays model introduced everywhere. And then in England, you have the client pays model, which is possible in the sense that a player would instruct the club to pay on his behalf, you know, with some fiscal implications. So that's throughout the world. There's no uniformity in there, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to organize that, to be honest, you know, because still it's a national issue. But yeah, let's try to strive for uniformity as much as possible. If you allow me to say something about agent representation in general, and I do want to mention this because you obviously mentioned Mel Steen, very former colleague, very much appreciated. Obviously, what he has done in the past. I was quite close also to Mel. He created the Association of Football Agents, and in my opinion, as far as I know, it still exists. So we deal with that organization from an AFA perspective. But when I saw your 5 points in the first slide, I immediately thought, okay, this could be interesting, and I think you should really consider that as well. To in what way ever to see if you can join forces or if you can act in sync with other existing organizations. Because if you mention education, you know, if you mention creating this platform, you know, there might be the case where your association is maybe more practical oriented, you know, than not the other association. But what is really, really important, and trust me on this one, you know, is to put egos aside, or to put any other practical implications aside, and to find a way that at least, you know, you can create a joint block because we have been exploited. And I say we, you know, as agent organization, not the agent myself, we've been exploited by the fact that agents have not been collectively organized with all the agents together. FIFA has used that as a threat or as an argument to say, oh, we try to speak to agents, but you know, we can't. So that's why we created the FIFA Agent Working Group with every individual coming from other part of the world, so we have all the world covered. Now, so you're really prudent about that.
I take it you're talking about, you know, Ryan, when you mention his ego, you know, it's honestly,
he's not the one wearing the tie today, Tony. So.
But no, listen, thank you so much for that advice as well. And I think, you know, obviously this is our first meeting. We're not going to, you know, run before we can walk. And I think getting some good people in who appreciate that and appreciate working in cooperation with others is absolutely vital for us. Now, I wouldn't really want it any other way. I wouldn't want to try and just plow a lone furrow, you know, particularly in this very complicated and, you know, very multi-dimensional space.
Exactly. You know, that's what I would say. And seriously, Tony, it has been the major element of frustration of reaching goals. You know, just the fact that agents, the overall claim, agents are not organized, or not collectively jointly organized. And I think that's, in essence, it's also a bit of a strange argument, because first we had the argument when we were working with the regulations, working with intermediaries, where you only need to be registered.
Yeah.
Then obviously you couldn't gather every agent because anyone could be an agent, you know. So that was an interesting point. And now, from one moment to another, practically the FIFA license was introduced. So now we only have licensed agents, you know. So how does that work? So first, I have an organization with around 2,000 members, and many of them are registered agents. Then let's say over time, from the first start, maybe 500 got a license. Do I need to kick all the 1,500 agents out? You know, how does that work? So I think the whole issue about representation also one that needs to be properly defined in order to not create unrealistic or not existing barriers for agents to be represented, you know, to put it like that.
Perfect, Roberto. Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you in the near future.
Yeah, me too. Good luck, and as mentioned, you know, look around and see if you can gather or at least operate in sync with other organizations, because that will really bring everything forward. And I'm quite sure with what you've created, with the foundation that you've made, with the Football Transfer Forum, with the various events that you organize, I think that this is a very welcome development. And even the AFA, you know, they should be really very happy that this development comes off the ground. And if I were them, then I would knock on your door as well. So,
okay, thanks, Roberto. Perfect.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Great stuff. Excellent. Brilliant. Great to hear from Roberto there, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, you know, we've known Roberto for a long time and done some really good work on various webinars and events, and I've been to some of their conferences as well. And you know, they are, for me, the voice in Europe, particularly for, you know, representation of agents. And there's a lot of good people work at the European Football Agents Association. Time for a poll, Ryan, I think.
Time for a poll. Time for a poll. So, Tony, you just want to give a bit of an intro in what the first poll. We've got 3 polls today. What this first one's going to be about.
I've forgotten the question, but if you get the poll up, it's
here we go.
Yeah. So, as football agents, what are we've been talking about some of the issues in my sort of introduction and the background. The question we're asking is, as football agents, which are the issues that concern you the most? And it's a sort of multi-choice poll, so you can choose 3. So if everyone spends a couple of minutes having a look at that poll,
yeah, you'll need to scroll down to see them, to see all of them.
I think is there about 10, Ryan?
Yeah, it's about 10. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about some of these things already, so if you have a look and maybe choose your top, the three that most concern you, really. We'll have a couple of minutes to do that.
Yeah. We'll give it about another 30 seconds or so.
Well, you're pushing it, Ryan, aren't you? Like, it's like there's
Cool.
quite a lot to read in that. There's 10 sections, so give them a bit longer than that.
All right.
Okay, Ryan, should we say another 30 seconds?
Yeah, most people have voted. There's only 25% or so of people that haven't. So if you have a chance. Okay, last 10 seconds. Right, great. We'll end the poll there and share the results. Yeah, so Tony, it looks like let me just quickly have a look through. I think everyone can see it. So yeah, so I think the big three are unlicensed agents, the implementation of the FAR document, and understanding and abiding by all the complex rules and regulations.
Well, to be honest, that's not a surprise really, but I think, you know, we've had, you know, all those issues are obviously playing on people's minds, because every issue, there's not one issue that hasn't been given at least a couple of votes, you know. So
12%, the lowest one. Yeah, it's quite interesting that.
I think I really chime with understanding and abiding by all the complex rules and regulations. And I think, you know, when people are studying to get the agents exam, it's a 700-page document. Once you've done that and you've passed and you're successful, then you have to register with the FAA, and then you have to understand also and things, you know, there are differences in how they treat things, with like working with minors. So for me, understanding and abiding by the complex rules and regulations, you know, and that just smacks straight away of, so we need to explain, we need to educate, we need to help agents, so that, you know, I know the FA in England have sanctions, and there's quite a list of people sanctioned who, you know, and it's often it's nothing sinister. It's they haven't read the regulations right, they haven't registered as being able to work with minors. It's a lot of that sort of stuff. You know, there are some other cases as well, but generally it's technical things that they haven't, understood the rules and regulations. FAR is obviously on everyone's mind, and I think that will become clearer. And it is clear in England with the court case that was successful really in a certain number of areas, but it'll become clearer once that has been sorted out with the European Court of Justice.
Anything else in there that is of interest? I mean, late or non-payment of commission, 35%. That's obviously an issue, Tony.
Yeah, I think when you're running your own business, and if you feel like you're self-employed and you're working on a commission-only basis, which a lot of agents do, then this is really key for you. If somebody isn't wanting to pay you on time or are not paying for months on end, that is a real big issue for agents. And I think as a group, if we can flag up which clubs aren't paying on time or whatever, I think that could be helpful, and we can support agents in that way. The bottom one, unlicensed football agents, I think, the exam isn't easy. It wasn't easy for people. There was obviously a number of legacy agents who got, a FIFA license without doing the exam because of the years they'd done, or because they'd done their exam previously, like I did. But getting the exam isn't easy. It's tough, and the pass rate isn't that high. So people are still operating or sort of operating around the fringes, and that's something that, I mean, I'd like everyone to get the FIFA exam passed and get licensed.
Anything else you want to touch on in there, Tony? You think it's important to mention?
No, I think it's a good guide, and it can help us going forward as well.
Excellent. Brilliant. Excellent. Right. Well, let's move on, and we're going to discuss what we're proposing. The structure of this association is going to look like. And I think it's worth saying, Tony, that I think, like Roberto touched on, was I think that obviously there has been groups trying to represent agents in recent times. That kind of regularity of group dialogue perhaps hasn't been there, which is one of the things that we want to address. So what we'll be doing, what we'll be delivering out, our meetings on a quarterly basis, of which this is the first. 3 online and 1 live in-person meeting. The in-person meeting, Tony, will just be for FIFA licensed football agent members, but it will be recorded for what we're calling aspiring agents who can join on a separate membership model.
Yeah, I think regular meetings, and hopefully we'll have some guests who are important in the football agent business, and it would be ideal to get some, to move the in-person meeting around. So we maybe do one in England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, whatever, wherever. So move the in-person meeting round. But I think it's important just to have an opportunity to come together. If people have questions that are, not necessarily we're going to debate in this meeting, but to ask of the FA, or just general points or things that they feel are important to put on the agenda. And I think the people that make up our board, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. I think those people will bring a lot to the table, and we're already sort of starting to think about various topics and things that are coming up, just as we've seen on the issues that we've just done a poll on.
Yeah, I've just included the link on there for the LinkedIn group as well. So the intention is very much, we'll see you next quarter. There'll be the information going out on that group, and for any of you that are already linked into either Tony and myself sort of individually, or through the Football Transfer Forum, as Roberto mentioned as well, you'll be able to see the types of regularity of content that goes out on there. In terms of the content that will be going out on that page, will obviously sort of be bespoke in and around the aims of the association. And Tony, we've got a provisional date for the next meeting, haven't we?
Yeah, I think it's like we say, we want to do everything quarterly. So we're looking at May the 21st, and that's a Wednesday, the same time. It was actually the date that the exam was supposed to be on until FIFA changed it into a June date. So it's yeah, it's Wednesday the 21st of May, I think, Ryan. So hopefully we'll get, you know, an uptake in members, and we'll have another meeting on that date. And really, you know, from the membership, we, you know, if there's topics that they want to hear about, you know, we'll get people in to talk about them and cover them as best we can.
Okay, let's talk about some of the roles available within the association. I'll share my screen again.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So look, we're looking. I mean, we've put an advert out, and I think we need to refresh that advert, Ryan. But we've put an advert out for people who want to come and help the association. And I've seen a couple of comments in the chat there about people who are offering help and support. So that's great. And I want it to be as broad as possible. And I think my idea was ideally we've got somebody covering every part of the UK and Ireland, so a representative who can liaise with the national governing body in that, the member association in that country. So that takes up about 4, 5, 6 people. Somebody to do partnerships. So what we're really looking for is to see if we can get some companies backing us and helping us. Maybe companies that are in this space who are, you know, looking to work with agents or looking to work in the football space would be good. An academic representative, Ryan. I'm going. I don't know why I'm going from the bottom up, but we'll finish with the top, the legal. But an academic representative, Ryan. I mean, me and you have been members of the Football Collective for a number of years, and I think there's some good work in there, and I think we've showcased some of their work. Just elaborate on that, please, Ryan, if you could.
Yeah, you know, the Football Collective is a group of academics that are doing research in and about the game, you know, all over the country, all over the world, and they put on a great annual event. But the one stark thing that you get from going to that event is the lack of actual industry practitioners at that event, both clubs, associations, and indeed agents. There's lots of research going on about agents. I've done an interview this morning for somebody that's doing a master's on agency, and it's prevalent. It's prevalent, and you know one of the things that we definitely want to do is use that resource. So is there some research that you guys would like to see that, you know, we can link into some of the universities to help steer research in that particular direction? We certainly want to be harvesting the research that is being done to furnish you guys with and really football generally is pretty poor at engaging academia in terms of future policy making for best practice. We certainly don't replicate manufacturing or aviation and sort of like, you know, some of the other sciences where research drives policy. Results on a Saturday drive policy in our game.
And look, I was at the Football Collective in Newcastle, and there was a couple of people from the industry, and they were on panels and what have you, and it was useful. But we'd like, you know, what I'm finding in universities and particularly young men and more, we're seeing some younger women. The agent role is a really attractive role, and people are thinking, oh, I'd like to be either an agent or a sporting director. Them two sort of roles are coming up every time, and students are interested in those things as a study materials as well. But also it's this piece about getting the word out of what an agent actually does, informing people, not the perception, is what the reality is of what an agent actually does. And I know myself and Ryan, I know of some other agents as well are doing stuff in universities and colleges. The next one was club liaison representative. Now that I've just added that to it. We had 12, but club liaison I think is really important. What I was hoping for was not just have it's an agent association just for agents and we're in our own little bubble. I was wanting somebody who's got a really strong club background, who's done deals or has been involved in that on the opposite side of the table. What's your experience? What can you inform us about, and what are the things that you see as best practice and good practice and that type of thing. So it's not just, right, we're all just for FIFA licensed agents, we all sit in a room and talk about agent issues. We're trying to broaden it out. So I think club liaison would be vital. And I don't know whether anyone on the call would be interested, because we've probably got the majority of agents on here, but I think that's something we certainly need for the future. Next one is a women's game representative. Now, you'll notice that we've got EDI and a women's game representative. I think with the growth of the women's game, and really I'm just we're just scratching the surface at the moment. But, the growth of the women's game is fantastic to see. I like to see more women agents coming into the game, and all right, maybe the economics of it aren't quite there at some of the clubs yet, but it's certainly growing, and it certainly will be in the future. So we need to start off on the right foot and on the right foundation, and have, it'd be great to have somebody who's a representative, for the women's game, as well as having the equality, diversity and inclusion rep. I think having somebody, specifically for the women's game is important. The last two, press and sort of PR representative and legal counsel. I think Roberto is a really good example of somebody who's got a legal background, and he, I think it's vital for us to have an input from somebody, a lawyer who can, really help us and steer us on what are very important. And I make the joke, the lawyers at the moment are the poster boys of football, or the accountants sometimes are the poster boys of football. So we do need somebody on our side who's legally qualified. So so those are the ones that we are suggesting. It's not, like I think we said at the outset, it's not cast in stone. This is how we sort of see things moving forward. And you've put some benefits down there, Ryan, as well, for those people.
Yeah, it's although it's a kind of voluntary position, if you like, we want to try and give something a bit back. So yeah, you get free membership of the association, contribution towards your expenses to the in-person meeting, and then a free ticket to the football transfer forum, which has got a good value attached to it, as well. I think the big motivator for people will hopefully be seeing that they can be part of something in a really tangible way. And some of those roles there, I'm looking at and thinking, but that would give me, a bit of good credence really in the game, and it'd be a nice thing to have attached to the rest of the things that you're doing in and around the game. So yeah, we'll obviously refresh those opportunities across the LinkedIn page, and we're gonna extend the opportunities for people to put their hands up for these roles pretty much to the end of March, Tony.
Well, let's just do it to the end of
oh, sorry, the end of February.
End of Feb.
Sorry, I meant sorry, the end of February. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it to the end of Feb. But if you have applied online, I think when it was, I think I was involved in setting it up, so I wasn't technologically brilliant. I think some people have got a negative response straight away just from the algorithms on LinkedIn. Please ignore that. We're going to write out to everyone at the end of the month, sort of early days of March. And like Ryan says, if you want to throw your hat into the ring, Ryan, put your email address in there. You will have Ryan's email address, I think, but we'll put that out on an email as well. Just pop an email to Ryan, stating which of the areas you think. I think we just had somebody on there putting themselves forward for one of the roles. And we've had about 30 people apply through LinkedIn, so we've got a good number coming through, and we'll have to sift through them and and see how many we can put into place.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Should we have another poll, Tony, or should we go on to the next section?
Let's have another poll.
Let's have another poll.
I like the polls. Yeah.
We love the polls. We love the polls.
Yeah. Well, no, it's useful just to know and get a bit of feedback from people.
Absolutely. Okay. Poll number 2.
Yeah, and it's quite straightforward, this one. What would you like more information on? So just take your time, choose your top 3. We've got football agent regulations, the FAR document, the national football agent regulations. I think there's going to be a new or an updated version of that coming out soon in England. Legal challenges, which Roberto touched on. Insight into the transfer market trends, and I think Dan will give us some insight into that as well. Let's see what else is on this list, Ryan. The European Football Agents Association, working with minors, which is often one of those things that is a minefield for some agents. We see a number of sanctions relating to working with minors rules. Football clubs who are in or facing financial difficulties. You don't want to find out too late after the deal's done that there's a football club that's, heading into financial trouble. So just take a couple of minutes just to complete that poll. Another minute, Ryan?
Sounds good.
Well, let's take it to 4 minutes. Yeah. Or
I think it's quite demonstrative, isn't it, of like all the things that are going on. We probably could have done a list of 20 things.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's where do you sort of stop? I think Dan Plumley will be, I don't know whether Dan's on yet, but he'll be interested because that's a good thing. Insight into transfer market trends seems to be a popular.
Yeah, that's fortunately that scored well.
Roberto, the European football, if you're still on, it's yeah. I think you must be doing such a good job getting information out there that people know about it and they don't need any more.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that the bottom one there, Tony, you referred to it earlier, the Employment Agencies Act. It's a little strange one, that, isn't it? That did come out of nowhere really, because I think what they were suggesting was pretty wild, really.
Well, it was I think we got a letter in July, just in the middle of a transfer window, which is never a good time to send an agent a letter, but an email, and basically saying, look, football agents and agencies are acting as recruitment agencies. Would you like to make any comments about that as a football agent and how you see it? And yeah, it came out of a bit left field, but to be honest, I've heard nothing since. You know, and we're now in February, so that's 8 months ago. I've had no response. I actually wrote in and you know, put some points across. But you know, has it gone away? Have they just thought, let's not go there?
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
Okay, I'll end the poll there and I'll share the results out so people can see. So yeah, insights into transfer market trends there. 2/3 of people had that down. Of course, the FAR document.
Yeah.
And look, the legal challenges such as the DR case. You know, Tony, you and I did a webinar on an excellent webinar. I see, not me and you, the guests that we had on. We were mere facilitators of the
We'll share that. We'll share that webinar with
Yeah.
everyone in due course. You know,
That
everyone.
was, I mean, that is and that was, you know, such a potential,
Yeah.
you know, sort of breakage of the traditional
Curveball.
structure. Mm.
But the interestingly, 43% who to contact in the 5 member
Yeah.
associations, and I'd sort of like to sort of think that, you know, we could collate a couple of, you know, any questions or any points that people need addressing,
Yeah.
and then, you know, reach out to whichever FA is appropriate or all of the FAs and see, you know, if they can give us a response back as a group so that we can share it with everyone, because I think that's easier than them getting 10 different emails from 10 different agents or different people.
Absolutely.
Interesting that though.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Okay, we're gonna just talk very briefly about the opportunities for organizations that provide products and services into the game to partner with us. Look, now Tony and I have worked with lots of companies that provide everything from data analytics to people moving the top players in the world all around the world, and products and services a part of the agency landscape, and there's loads of businesses that do benefit from positive relationships with agencies. And likewise, Tony, you know, part of the role of an agent is often to help advise the player on some of the stuff that they're acquiring, whether that's physical goods or services as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the agency and what football agents can do for their clients and how introducing people who are maybe a commercial partner, maybe somebody who does social media for them, videography. There's so many other aspects of the football agent's business. And you know, you're not going to be an expert in every single area. So bring people in to work with the players who are trusted and who you can rely on. And I think we've noticed by running the football transfer forum, the number of different companies, you know, some of them want to work with clubs and agents, some of them just want to work with agents. And we'd love to get some partners in. You know, everything has a particular cost, and if a partner can come in and offer either discounts on services or or put some money into the association, that would be great. And we're looking to build sort of long-term partnership with, 2 or 3 or even more, really good firms.
Mm. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to announce that FC Business have decided to come on as a partner. For those of you that know FC Business, obviously it's the trade publication for the UK football industry. Have been going over 20 years and have been a partner of some of the other things that Tony and I have been involved in for a long time. Former editor myself of FC Business as well, so I should bloody think so as well in terms of them getting involved.
Maybe they'll do an article on us, Ryan, eh?
Yeah, maybe.
An article.
But certainly, I'd recommend if you for whatever reason you haven't heard of FC Business, that you pop along onto their website. If you drop Aaron, the editor, an email and say that you want to go on the distribution list, I'm sure he'll be able to help you out as well. But that's great that we've got those guys on as a partner as well. Okay, let's.
Do you know what,
I'll
Ryan?
show you one more.
We've been through sort of an hour and 10 or an hour and 5 minutes of the webinar. We've not had any questions, so we must be covering all the bases. There are Q&A at the end, but if there are questions, start putting them in the question Q&A box.
Cool. Okay, let's get on to memberships, Tony, and what we are looking to do as a structure. So ultimately, we've got 2 types of memberships. One for FIFA if you're a FIFA licensed football agent, so you're either a legacy agent or you've passed the exam and you've paid your money and you've got your number and you're a FIFA licensed agent. Or if you're an aspiring football agent, because there are lots of people out there that are considering going into agency and they're either not ready yet or they're either building up to taking the exam. And these people, from mine and Tony's perspective, deserve to be part of the narrative, to contribute, their thoughts as well. And often they're bringing other good insight from the things that they're either leaving from or building up to becoming an agent.
Yeah, we thought long and hard about this, Ryan, and it's like I said before, we want to be a sort of broad church, having just football agents. And look, some of the aspiring football agents may have been in the business for a number of years and just not passed the exam yet, or haven't, whatever. Like I said, it's a really tough exam. So there might be, returning agents wanting to get back into becoming fully licensed. And I think it's important to have that broad, I think this is where the education piece comes in as well, Ryan, because some of them will be building up to taking the FIFA football agents exam. And I think the knowledge and getting into an organization that is, talking about agent issues is only going to benefit them.
Absolutely. So when we've thought about price, we want to be able to offer this membership at something that's really affordable. So I think we said from the very, very start, the motivations are very much about trying to foster as big as a collective of people that are operating in and building up to operating in agency within the UK and Ireland. We've provided a structure in terms of what that's going to look like, in terms of what's going to be delivered out. I think the roles that we've spoke about give another little insight into some of the work that will be potentially going on your behalf. And I think in terms of the price point where we've got to, I think it represents really, really good value. So for a FIFA licensed football agent, The normal price moving forward will be £49.99 per year. But as a result of everybody coming on this webinar, everybody's been given a £10 discount. So that will be discounted. You'll have a specific payment link that I'm going to share with you shortly to £39.99, and that's for the year, but it's paid quarterly. So you'll pay just 10 quid every quarter.
So Ryan, it's a couple of coffees a month, but I was thinking about this, and we had that coffee in the St. Pancras foyer.
Yeah, it's half a cup of coffee.
It's half of one in the St. Pancras foyer. Just don't have 2 cups in there. It's very expensive.
And then for the aspiring football agent, really to kind of reflect, I guess the sort of demographic where a lot of those guys are coming from, where they're at. It's slightly cheaper, and again discounted by £10 up until the end of March, and again paid quarterly.
Yeah, Ryan, there's a typo there for the 31st of the 3rd for the FIFA licensed. It's actually 25. That should be 25, shouldn't it? So it's the end of March, basically, for both discounts. And obviously, everyone who's been on here, we hope that you want to sign up and you want to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna share in the chat box now the FIFA licensed football agent link.
Yeah, and you look, I'll write out to everyone.
Yeah,
there'll be a recording of this coming out to you guys. I'll make sure I put them links in the recording as well, so you've got all the information that you need. I'm not sure whether we can share the polls or not, but I'll try and do that. As much information as I can get out there. That'll be with you tomorrow once the recording's been processed.
Yeah, and then
aspiring.
I might have done that the way around. Let me have a look. Yeah, so that's the aspiring agents, and I'll just resend the FIFA license one. Here we go. There. So we'll resend that out on email anyhow, so you've got that. But obviously, we're really hopeful and keen that you'll come and support. Like I say, I think for the cost it is on a quarterly basis versus what we're looking to provide, I think it represents really good value as well. Tony,
right? Is Dan on? Can you get Dan on to the?
I'll get Dan.
So yeah, I mentioned him at the start. We've got Dan Plumley, he's getting to be a bit of a regular now. I met him through the football collective that we talked about. He's our sort of finance guru. He's hi Dan.
Hi guys, you okay?
Yeah, really good, Dan. Thanks for dropping in on this call.
No problem.
I was just introducing you, but you can do it better than me. So just introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, hi everyone. Dan Plumley. I work at Sheffield Business School, but as an academic principal lecturer in sport finance is the job title. I've been doing that now for near enough 15 years, and there's a fair bit of research, books, publications in the academic space around the area of applied sport finance, and do a lot of work with the media and latterly kind of consulting with clubs and leagues on various pieces of work around all things finance, governance, regulation. And yeah, I think Tony, you were just saying as I was in the background, this is probably my second or third time as part of one of these events, just going through some of the things from the transfer window. So no, always great to be involved, and yeah, looking forward to it as always.
The two most important things are, which side of the city are you on, United or Wednesday?
I'm from the blue side of the city.
Right. Okay. Not having a bad season though, Dan?
No, but as we've had many conversations, and I'm sure a lot of the people on the call will be well aware, the Championship is a really tough league to get out of, and I just feel that the top kind of 4 look well set, and we'll be scrapping around for the final 2 places. But as are 10 other clubs, and it's super tough. But
and
we live in hope.
Things a bit calmer off the field at Hillsborough, Dan, or
not really. No, Ryan. I think the ownership issue is still very much an issue, and of course, looking at the other side of the city, they've got a takeover over the line and have been pretty active in January, and have got very big plans that we can see kind of coming down the track as well. So I guess that kind of ownership thing is still there as well, which is not ideal. But again, the market's such a challenge, and that league in particular, so it's a tricky one. But hey, you never know, dear. So let's see where we are.
I'm sure some of the guys will have come across Chancery deals and had the hard sell or whatever. But
probably got more experience on that than me. But from what I've seen, and he's not the easiest person to deal with at times.
But again, the second thing I was going to say is it's such a good time for sports lawyers, but it's probably even a better time for people like you who are into the financial side of the game. Looking at transfers, looking at who's spending money, looking at PSR and all that. It's such an interesting time to be doing what you're doing, Dan.
Yeah, I think you and I have had that chat, Tony, haven't we? There's an international sport law master's course that we run at the university, actually, and
I didn't want you to plug the.
No, sorry,
I'm only joking.
I was just saying they put in a sport finance module a couple of years ago, which I now deliver, and the principal reason being behind that was the course leader is a lawyer, active sport lawyer. And he was saying, nowadays more so than ever, they need to be aware of the financial regulations, the financial performance of clubs, the issues with ownership, etc. And that was his rationale. And that kind of blending of law and finance in sport is probably as big as it's ever been, isn't it?
Like the investment companies rank businesses, like they give them a AAA standard if they're solid investments, solid companies. Do you ever envisage anything like that for football clubs, Dan?
It'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it? Maybe not to that level, but I'm involved in some kind of private work in that space as well, and it's sort of kind of what we do. When you're looking at speaking to people, especially from investors looking to target clubs, there is that kind of rating to how a club looks in both on and off the field. I think the other thing I would always tag on to that as well is it's about matching the right owner with the right club for their ambitions and objectives as well, because there's one thing about targeting a club that maybe has history or has the name or they've had a spell of success in recent years, but that might not be the right club for an investor or for the player in that regard as well. So there's a lot to be said about actually looking at, again, I think for me it comes back to ownership of the club. You've got to kind of look at that and go, right, is that something you want to be involved with? Or if it's not, if you come in as an investor, can you take it on to the next level, or do you want the whole thing and then push it in a different direction? So as much as we talk about the money side of things, I think a lot of the time it does come back to ownership and governance as well.
Right, we're going to talk about the January window. So it's sort of a debrief on the January window and what went on across the sort of England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and the various leagues, and obviously, I haven't stated this, and I think I need to. We're looking at the men's and the women's game, aren't we? Because and that's our organisation. I've been to so many meetings where it's just full of men, and it's just looking at the men's game. We want to be an organisation that looks at the women's game just as much as the men's game. So, you've got a bit of a presentation, Dan, yeah?
Yeah, no problem. Let me just share the screen in the background. And hopefully I can.
Have you given him permission, Ryan, to share?
Let's try that one.
There we go.
Can you guys see that?
It's working. Yeah, it's working. Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's just. So can you guys just see one slide in PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, lovely. Well, as I say, thanks both. That's a nice little introduction to a very brief session today on just looking at the January transfer window. And if anybody does want to connect after the call, I know we've got a little bit of time for Q&A as well, but my details are on the screen there as well. Always happy to have a chat and make some new connections. And thanks again, Tony and Ryan, for inviting me back on. So in terms of just to kick off with the headlines, and Tony, as you alluded to, I've got the data that is kind of readily available. There's a lot with the transfer market, as you guys and people on the call will know, that isn't available. The Irish picture is really interesting. It's difficult to kind of unpick some of the trends there and get a lot of that data. What we have got this year is more numbers on the women's game than ever before, so I'll touch on that. And then I've tried to cover off all leagues in between, and happy to take any questions on the others as well. But in terms of the headlines for January, it's interesting that it was a record-breaking window across the world game. I think that probably went a little bit unnoticed. And January is often a lot quieter than the summer, as we know. And the next slide will give a bit of a wider trend analysis on when clubs typically spend their money, particularly in the men's game with the English Premier League. But there was £1.9 billion spent globally by clubs in this January window. England was a big part of that, as it always is. That accounted for just over a quarter of that spend in the men's game, that 1.9 billion, by the way. So clubs in England accounted for just over a quarter of that, just shy of 500 million. The Premier League within that spent 370 million. The figure's not been confirmed for English Football League, but taking one away from the other, that's going to be in the region of 128 million pounds there. There's some interesting data on League One as well, which I'll touch upon as part of this presentation. And then if you look at kind of who was next on the list, we've got Germany, Italy, France, and then Saudi Arabia. And again, we've talked about that in previous, certainly webinars I've done with you guys, but wider than that as well. The Saudi Arabia has not gone away. There was that big push, wasn't there, a couple of years ago, and they've been active in January as well. It won't go away, but we have seen them, kind of take their foot off the accelerator a little bit.
There was the big transfer from Aston Villa, wasn't it, the striker, which is half of that amount, I think.
Yeah, and that's really important for context, absolutely. So you look at these kind of headline numbers and we can unpick a little bit of that further. And again, there's always interesting cases to draw upon because, of course, we can cover some of this off as part of the Q&A as well. But there's Aston Villa's PSR position within that as well that's been well documented. And actually, that sale for a young striker that had come into a little bit of form this season and they turned a couple of bids down in the summer to then make that deal was interesting as well.
If there's an agent on here who did that deal, I'm so pleased you're joining us from the Bahamas. But fantastic. Yeah.
No, cracking little bit of business. And then kind of looking at the rest, this is where the picture gets a little bit tricky sometimes. The Scottish Premier League, and I've caveated that with from what I can see, because from all the sources that we would usually use to collate this and all the kind of reputable media stuff that goes over the top, they didn't spend a lot. And that 8 million is from what, again, from the outside looking in, that you can see is one transfer, and that was Jota to Celtic. So there's not a lot of movement in the Scottish window. Again, that's not kind of unusual in the bigger picture of January, but very little spent in Scotland. And of course, Rangers and Celtic will dominate that position, and who's going to get the Champions League is the kind of biggest driving force financially in that particular league. And then if we look at the women's game, and we spoke about this certainly in November when I was last on the webinar around kind of predicting what was going to happen next. And I'm not saying it's a particularly, it's not a groundbreaking prediction to say there's going to be growth, but we have started to see the numbers tick up quite substantially. And again, I'll unpack that a little bit later in the presentation, but £4.6 million spent in the women's game overall, and that was up 180% on last year's record. So starting to see some significant transfers and movement in that space, and a lot of movement in the agent space as well there that I'm sure people on the call will be aware of as well.
Right.
So those were some of the headline numbers. And just to unpack that a little bit further now, and then have a look at, what we might think's coming down the track and other things that are affecting the market as well. I mentioned this previously, that clubs are traditionally more quiet in the January window. And what this shows you, this is men's English Premier League summer and winter spending for the last few years. And you can see there the blue bar is the summer window. So pretty clear trend of it, the summer spend dominating. We often see the January window as a little bit more reactive to on-pitch position more often than not. So if you are going to spend in January, it might be in response to a particular position that you're in, whether that's good or bad. You could be in a relegation battle. You could be perhaps overachieving, looking to push for a promotion. And we sometimes see clubs react to that. You get a little bit of the managerial change impact as well. If a club's made a managerial change in and around the Christmas period, they might look to spend a little bit to back that manager in January. But historically speaking, it's relatively quiet. And this kind of winter window again ticked up a little bit from what we'd seen. We had 2024 where if you remember a year ago, PSR was the hot topic in the window. It wasn't which player was going to go where, it was which Premier League club is going to fall foul of PSR, and that produced a very low January transfer window, certainly compared to what we saw in 2023. And then of course, if we fast forward into the summer of 24, we had that kind of unofficial transfer window around the 30th of June, where a lot of players moved around those clubs that were potentially at risk of PSR. So that's still in the background here, but 370 million spent in this window. But as Tony, as you were alluding to earlier with Saudi Arabia and Duran's transfer, we have to look kind of within that picture as well. And that was principally dominated by Manchester City, who spent pretty much on their own as much as all the other 19 clubs combined. And I've been asked the question a lot in the media recently around, does that signify what we think might be coming down the track with the upcoming verdict? And not to disappoint too many people, but the answer is ultimately not really, because you can spin that argument both ways. You could say, well, they've been spending because they know they're not going to get charged, so therefore it's all things business as usual. Or the counter argument is, well, they're spending now because they might be expecting some sort of embargo further down the track.
Yep.
So
Dan, did Man City not make a profit in the? Hardly did much, but made a big profit. Was it last summer or was it last January?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and they're fine. You know, we know their finances are in generally a good state nowadays. That's kind of nobody's debating that. But this kind of what's happening around the transfer window, and should we read anything into the verdict, it is really tricky. I think what is interesting, not just the level of spend, but where City have spent and others have, is that they've been on younger players as well, and maybe that's a signalling of a bit of a transition under, kind of what might be Pep Guardiola's third iteration of this team and how it evolves. But and I think probably less focus has been on who they've bought rather than the focus has been on why they've bought and does it impact this verdict that we've got coming up. So there's no definitive answer on that, but just interesting to note, as we say, that we're looking at a headline number of 370 million spent, but 180 million of that is by one club.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the verdicts recently, though, Dan, obviously have gone in effectively in favour of City in terms of around some of the commerciality deals. Do you get a sense that that's going to have some sort of momentum into the main deal, or the issue is just so separate that it won't have any bearing?
Yeah, I think we need to separate them, Ryan, personally still. The associated party transaction case recently with the independent tribunal ruling that kind of block period was unlawful, it is a win for Manchester City, I think, for sure. We have to consider that. That was a significant decision in the context of the Premier League and that particular ruling. But when we look at the bigger verdict with the bigger case with City, we know that goes back to all the way to the start of Premier League PSR, and that's years and years worth of charges and things that are there that are very different to that. So, I think that needs to be looked at in its own right. And there's issues with the associated party transactions now. That's pretty clear. But I would separate the two out, in terms of what might happen next.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Manchester City, and just a couple of other things to draw attention to. It was really interesting that we, in the men's game, and a little bit of a look then at the women's game and some wider thoughts. It was really interesting that we started talking about ownership on the start of the call in the introduction, because often you can see the real impact of ownership models and how they're operating, and particularly with one eye on the American ownership and the American investment in men's European football, but also into the women's game, and not just in the Premier League as well, kind of further down the leagues. This graphic caught my eye in the FT a couple of weeks ago. So this is League One men's transfer spend going back nearly 20 years worth of data. And if you look at the total spend in that league itself, in and around £20 million this season versus where it's been previously, but then overlay Birmingham City onto the top of that as well. And sometimes you'll get these anomalies in the market that will, year on year, you'll get that little bit of volatility, just because sometimes because of where a club is positioned. So it's highly likely that Birmingham City would have spent that money had they been in the Championship. They'd have had to be more mindful of Championship PSR, which they will have to consider ultimately, probably when they get promoted, not if, because it looks like that will happen sooner rather than later. But you, not just where they were on the pitch, but also the impact of their ownership model, and a very bullish ownership model that's very much looking at, setting really ambitious targets. They've got plans for a new, I think it's 60,000 seater stadium that they want to build. They've just invested into the Birmingham Phoenix cricket franchise as well. So there's a lot going on around that space with Birmingham City as an example, but you can look at how Dan, they can dominate a market as well.
Dan, if you can get a club from League One up to the Premier League, the value of that club just skyrockets, doesn't it? Through every step, whatever you bought it for initially, if you can get it up to the Premier League, it's, you've made however much it costs you on yearly income and expenditure, the actual value of the club in the Premier League, just skyrockets. So puts all that into, it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right, Tony. And it does depend on individual motives and owner motives. And we look at the American model of ownership. It's very much more often than not about a strategic purchase for a long-term return on investment. Yeah. Ultimately speaking, that's what they're there for. And yeah, we talked at the time around Birmingham City, being still an attractive proposition to buy into. And actually, if you look at the investor side of things as well, as we were talking, we know a lot of these football clubs are kind of distressed assets, and actually they become cheaper acquisitions when they're in trouble. If you can then, as you say, see the potential to grow them in the long term. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. If you look at the revenue gap between League One and the Championship, you're going to get an uplift of anywhere between £7 to £10 million in revenue from League One to the Championship. But you make the next jump and it's minimum 120 million revenue uplift overnight. So if you're an owner, yeah, absolutely, the valuation really jumps up. And I guess kind of useful to know those kind of numbers as well when you're dealing with player movements in that space as well, because there are clear levels to this, and it's a fairly big gap between League One and the Championship, but the Championship to the Premier League is huge in the men's game. So yeah, just interesting to look at the dynamic. And of course, the other point to mention there, with kind of dropping further down the league and how competitive it can then be, and how much of a challenge it can be. Of course, we've not just got Birmingham in that league at the minute. We've got Wrexham, who have clearly showed their intent to spend and get into the Championship. But Wycombe have been really active and have spent big money where we probably expected them not to. You've got American influence at Huddersfield as well. That league in itself now is almost has every year 4 or 5 clubs that budget wise, would blow some of the others out of the water. So it's tricky as well in that regard.
Yeah, Dan, I wanted to just ask you on that in terms of how Birmingham are going to try and those other clubs are going to navigate the salary cost management protocol, because there were new conditionalities in it set to the previous December, so that are live now for this reporting period, that actually included like more limitations on like what owner equity injection was gonna look like. I'm just seeing those numbers there and just sort of scratching my head about how they're gonna how they're going to marry that up. Even if it's sort of debt to equity or whatever it is, the wages alone need to fit into 60% of the turnover. Like how are they going to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the clubs that you'd be looking at under what is the current version of the regulation. So you've got, as you say, the current version of salary cost management protocol in League One to consider. These clubs are then going to have to look at Championship PSR, which is still live in that regard. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But of course, the Premier League have said we've got one more year of PSR now. I perhaps expected them to move in the summer, but they're going to give it one more year with PSR. I do still think they will shift to the UEFA version of squad cost rule in the future. And there's been enough noises to suggest that the EFL want to follow suit with that in time as well. Now, whether that's just Championship or League One and League Two, and actually what that squad cost rule looks like is a similar version to what SCMP is. Anyway, with a few tweaks. So there's a lot going on in terms of the next year that will shape the regulatory landscape. I guess with Birmingham as an example, they'll be perhaps more aware of that, or having been a Championship club, they'll know where they were at and then they'll know where they are now. But it is still a risk in many ways to spend that kind of money. I think I'll be looking at Wrexham. The next jump for them is huge because they haven't had any financial regulations really. SCMP is not enforced or penalised, so they've gone through the leagues without having any regulation really, and then they're going to be in the Championship at some point with PSR. So yeah, I think those clubs have got a tricky position to navigate, and there'll be a lot of work going on behind the scenes, as you say. Do we look to convert some of this debt to equity? Does that help us out? Can we spend big in the Championship? How do we view that? But again, it's the jeopardy point there, isn't it? Because you're going back to owners that have been quite bullish. Wrexham, we want Premier League. Birmingham City want Premier League as well. In reality, it's not that easy to get there, but I get the feeling that they won't stop completely. They'll keep pushing, but you've got to push within the regulations when you get to those certain leagues for sure.
Right.
So that's the men's game in terms of some of the headlines. And again, I just pulled out a couple of interesting things on the women's headlines as well, and then we'll look at kind of who didn't spend in context to who did spend. But I've talked about Manchester City there, but and I talked about a record in the men's side of things, and then talked about a record window for the women's game. But a lot of that was dominated by Chelsea themselves. New world record set, a couple of really big signings in there. And if you look at the overall spend, they've accounted for nearly 30% of that themselves. So again, it's interesting to look at individual clubs here and what's going on. And we know the bigger picture around Chelsea, Todd Bowley wanting to sell the women's team off almost like a franchise style sale. We know Chelsea's PSR issues in the men's side of things as well. And you have to look at the overall company structure of which the women's is a part of. But it was interesting to see them be very dominant in that women's market in January. As I say, when you take that into context, that's 30% of the overall spend. And we are starting to see, and you can see this in the finances already that are available for the women's game. There are dominant clubs within that, and there are clubs that have already got the jump on other clubs. And with that move to a new company taking over the WSL, what might come next for commercialization, what might come next from a governance point of view, we're also pretty much sure there's going to be a fan-led review for women's football further down the line as well, and a governance bill. So there's lots going on in that space as well that could shape the future of that game in the future.
Dan, I looked at a chart which had the sort of top 15 women's, they're all WSL or across Europe, the sort of top women's teams in terms of income generation, and I think 6 or 7 of them were in the WSL. Is the WSL similar to the Premier League, men's Premier League, where it is the top financed and where the best salaries are generally? Is that a picture that's actually emerging, or is that how it is?
Generally speaking, still yes, I think, but dominated also by big clubs within that league. I think it's fair to say as well. There are the clubs within that league that are more dominant, and I guess that you're right. There's still some other significant revenue generating clubs in Europe, some of the biggest teams in Europe, and then again you've got a lot of movement stateside as well in terms of what's happening there with the women's game, and we're starting to see a few transfers back and forth. There's always interesting because you can look at the one on the board there, but there's been some that have gone the other way, and so I guess that's where the game itself is probably seeing their rivals, so to speak. So
the balance between the American and the WSL type of thing, the American League.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's where the governance point becomes interesting for me. And again, we've talked about this with. It's really tricky to make huge changes in the men's game because historically it is what it is, and you can't retrospectively go in and change that ultimately. But the women's game's got some fairly significant decisions to make coming up around the commercialization aspect, what it does with player salaries, how it grows, because there's clearly growth potential. But the financial sustainability angle within that of individual clubs, but also making sure that you don't end up with a number of dominant women's teams in the future that just end up, like we're starting to see, to be fair as well. So, I think structurally and governance wise, what's coming next for the women's game is going to be really interesting. But certainly, if you look at the numbers, we're starting to see that uptake and uptick in transfer spend every window now.
And not quite the £1 million, but close to the.
Not quite,
What year was Trevor Francis sold for £1 million? Does anyone put it in the chat
Late
if you know?
80s.
I don't know. I'm just put it in the
I
chat.
guessed at 1989, but
is it the 80s? Was it the 80s? Do you think it was?
Yeah,
it was
or
Forest,
early
wasn't
90s.
It? Was it Forest with Cloughie on it? So anyway, I digress.
Yeah, but I don't think we're too far away from it based on those figures in the women's game, and certainly, despite the challenges to come, still growth potential. It is what most people are predicting. So that was who did spend. I'll just finish with who didn't, and then a couple of other factors at play that we've already started to talk about. As I said, it's often with January looking at that trend analysis, and I know you jumped on when you were halfway through that poll around interesting transfer market insights and trends. It's often interesting to look at who doesn't spend as well, and that's what a lot of the narrative is. And if you kind of know that going into that space, as you said, Tony, if you kind of can get a feel for a club's financial performance and position, you might be able to make educated guesses about whether or not that they'll be active in the market. I've seen a couple of quotes. These aren't my quotes, by the way. I've just used these to context the clubs that we're talking about. A couple of quotes around Manchester United about not repeating the mistakes of the past in January, looking to do it, looking at the summer window and looking at, there's clearly a big rebuild that needs to happen there and he's going on, but not to go, really active in January. Liverpool's the one that's been on, a number of people's lips around what's happening with Mo Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold and Van Dijk, but they're top of the league. They were top of the Champions League phase group, so there was that kind of right. Well, we're happy with the squad, and ultimately, if that delivers them some major honours, then they'll feel that they were vindicated to not go into the market in January and look at what happens in the summer. How many times do we talk about Arsenal needing a striker in a window? Do they actually want one is another question. There's an interesting point about needing to sell to a rival as well, which I'll finish with, which links into Arsenal and a couple of examples. Everton have got a big summer ahead. We didn't expect them to be active in January, really. And David Moyes actually came out and said, didn't he? We're looking to hold what we've got and keep our cards close to our chest so we can have some real room to move in the summer, which you now would expect with that ownership group moving forward and a new stadium on the horizon. So the ownership piece at play again. I mentioned earlier as well that the thing about City that we perhaps went under the radar a little bit, but that focus on youth over experience, players that did come in, particularly Bournemouth, Brighton, Manchester United, a lot of those were younger players. The average age signed in this window was 20.5 years old. And it's always, again, good to touch upon the short-term performance point that I mentioned. So in the Championship, Sheffield United spent a fair bit of money on, particularly on 2 new strikers, but they've got new owners that came out and said, you know, we'll back the club and have got bigger plans. Other clubs, Leeds and Burnley, as an example, had quieter windows, but also so did those at the bottom of the Premier League. And I think there's a bit of that going on sometimes, where clubs are looking at what's going on above them and thinking, well, you know, let's look at Southampton as an example. It'll take a miracle to keep them up. So that's one. If you're a club at risk of relegation in the Premier League, you're probably thinking, right, well, that's one that's going to go. So where are we, and what's our risk profile within that group of clubs? So it's interesting to look at that kind of movement between a little bit. And just to overlay then the final bit around some other factors that are always at play that we have to be mindful of. We've already started the conversation on PSR. How might that change? I thought it might be the summer, but the Premier League have come out and said we'll have 1 more year of current PSR, and then we'll transition to a new set of regulations moving forward.
So Dan, just on that, do you think the agreement on solidarity payments with the Football League has got to happen at the same time?
I would say yes, purely from a kind of it makes sense point of view. if that makes sense in terms of answering your question. I think if you're going to do that, if you're going to change the regulations, lock the new deal in at the same time. So everything kind of because there's never going to be a clean end point and start point with this, and we've seen this with UEFA. We're in a new set of regulations for UEFA now, but they were agreed in 2022, and we've had a 3-year transition, and we're still not at the end of that yet. So there's got to be that in and out transition.
Yeah.
But I think it's likely that you would want to get that deal done as well, so that it combines with that. As I said there on the second bullet point as well, I think a shift to UEFA's squad cost rule is the most likely outcome. There'll be some iterations that are league specific, like we've seen with PSR currently, the 105 million versus UEFA's 35 million. We've seen this 85% anchoring figure and to combine with UEFA's 70%. So I think we'll likely see some version of that. We've talked about the City case; it's still pending. There'll be maybe some potential, spill out from that. We just don't know yet. We've mentioned the associated party transactions case as well as a separate issue. We've seen some clubs react to that. Ryan, you mentioned about, do owners look to convert debt to equity to free up the finances and help the balance sheet a little bit? We've seen Brighton and Leicester do that already. Everton have done that in an ownership change as well. So that frees up the finances a little bit.
He's just about £150 million. He's just
really substantial
move.
It's a lot of money. You just look at it and go, oh, that's moved 150 million, and we just kind of pass it off. But that's a huge amount of money to, as you say, to convert to equity, because ultimately it means he can't get that back. That's the reality of it. So that's owners absolutely making sure that they are supporting the club. That's clear to see from a financial perspective. Ownership we've talked about a lot. Independent regulator, we probably need a day's webinar on that in terms of what still could happen with that and what it might look like moving forward, but it will still take a little bit of time for that to come in. We were talking about a shadow regulator being in place for the start of next season. I just don't see it, given where it's at in Parliament at the minute. I think it's likely that that's going to be shadow regulator now for 26, 27, just because of where the hold-ups have been. And I mentioned that example as well, just back to the transfer market, is you've got PSR as a huge factor still, but sometimes there is no need to sell to a rival, and you've got to factor in kind of where you're at and where other clubs are at as well, and looking around the league a little bit. And the Isak example, I think, that was doing the rounds this January is a good example of that. Newcastle are struggling to spend, and they've been pretty vocal about that, but also they don't need to sell. And if you are going to sell to a rival, they probably don't want to sell to Arsenal. And if Arsenal do want that player, then the price is going to go up considerably because of that position of both clubs in the league. So that's the short-term league position that often dictates movement in this particular window. And I know you said, Tony, I've been on a couple of times now, so I never want to outstay my welcome. But I think it was interesting looking back on this one to what we said in November, and for people on the call as well. If you're really interested in the finances of clubs, as Tony mentioned, if you get a feel for that, you can start to maybe predict what clubs are looking likely to spend, where you might be able to do your business. Because we talked in November about there were 9 clubs. This was just men's Premier League we focused on. There were 9 clubs that could have spent it if they wanted to. 6 of those were fairly active in the window. We looked at 7 clubs that probably shouldn't spend. Villa were one of them, but they shifted Duran on for a big fee to free up some of those loan moves, which don't come without risk attached. But there was a lot of the Duran transfer in that as well. We discussed the newly promoted clubs, Ipswich, Southampton, Leicester, plus Palace and Wolves. Big decisions, but we haven't seen any of those really go big. They're all kind of holding their nerve a little bit. We did predict that big shift in the women's transfer market. That was probably one of the easier predictions that we made. So I've given myself 8 out of 10 for that window.
I think
I might get an invite back, but I've marked my own homework. Apologies. But no, I think that what's interesting, again, just to close out there, is sometimes you can get trends, and longer term you can look at some of the trends. But there are always a couple of factors here and there every window that will just kind of push that volatility argument, and you can see that sometimes coming through, and it's just then taking a step back and looking at, okay, what's driving that, what's going on there, and almost that, controlling the controllables. If you're in that space, what can I control? What clubs am I looking to do business with? What players am I looking to do business with? And what can't I control, and what probably don't I want to step into at this point in time, and what can be, parked for another day.
Brilliant.
But that's it from me, guys. Happy to take
much.
any questions on any of that.
Yeah.
I will share the screen for a minute.
Obviously, agents on the call, Dan. I mean, ultimately, this is going to have an impact, certainly in that UEFA model, the shift to UEFA model. Wages, transfers, and agents' fees all squeezed within that percentage. But so on one hand, bad. On the other hand, if the associated parties' commercial deals gets liberated, then commercial revenues up, more space to do that. Good. So it's hard. It's hard, isn't it, to measure whether we're in a good moment or a dangerous moment?
Yeah, I think exactly right, Ray. And it's a balancing act. You've got things that will sway it every single time, and your point there is a good example. Clubs will be looking at agent spend probably much tighter now than ever because of that shift. And again, we think that's the way it's going. Clubs that already compete in Europe have to conform to those regulations, so it's already biting there, so to speak. But on the other side, if there's a bit of movement the other way where you can increase revenues, and the APT case there, or what follows next, allows clubs to shift commercial revenues or sponsorship deals or anything that drives revenue. Look at match day operations and the digital transformation of fans and how they consume and engage with the sport. Anything that shifts the revenue dial up kind of offsets that a little bit. And again, knowing some of those things, knowing what's happening at clubs, knowing what they're trying to do, it is an important understanding piece there as well.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Wolves' sponsor next season to be the country of China, just the Chinese flag.
Anyway,
they'll get their retaliation in quick.
Yeah,
thank you so much for that, Dan. That was really appreciated, and yeah, we're gonna have to have you back to set up the summer, I think. But we'll see you at the Football Transfer Forum anyway, won't you? So that'll be
yes,
great.
definitely. Yeah, great. I can make that. So yeah, it'd be really good to see you in person again.
Great stuff. Thanks, Dan. And listen, guys, obviously that's just some content that we've shared with you today. So we really appreciate you logging in to listen to the first sort of the inaugural meeting of the FTF Agents Association. Is there any questions, Ryan? Have we got any?
No. We've covered all bases.
So what we're going to do is we're going to do the last poll, which is a question for the audience, which if you could just, and we're talking about what are the most important things an agent an agents association can do for you. So what is it that we can help you with, really? And let's see, have a couple of minutes to answer that. Again, it's choose three. It's a bit like, it's not quite like the football agent exam. I know, obviously, all of you will know is a hell of a lot tougher than this. It's one of them. It's a multiple choice one, so you can put three answers, put your top three in. Yeah, great.
Just whilst you're doing that, thank you so much to the people that have already signed up to become a member. That's absolutely fantastic to see. I can see that a couple of people have attempted to do it, and it's down as incomplete. If you are playing through Link, it may ask you to take an additional authentication step. So you just need to do that, and then you'll be all sorted. But fantastic that we've got some people signed up.
Brilliant. And we've got some people wanting to become on the board as well, which is, really important to us, because like I said at the start, we want it to be a teamwork. We want to be a team effort. We don't, me and Ryan are kick-starting this thing. Without support from members and people who want to work on the board, it'll become very difficult. So, I feel sort of today's been a really good start. Ryan, are you quite happy with how it's gone today?
Yeah, I was just going to say, wearing a suit for the meetings is not compulsory. I don't want people thinking they've got to wear a suit to put anybody off.
I might ditch the tie for the next one.
No, really, really, really positive. I mean, look, ultimately, I think we've covered all the bases in terms of the absolute plethora of changes and challenges that are impacting your world, your business. And I think it's only right and proper that there is a collective voice. Let's have it right. There isn't one at the moment, and I feel like we're going to be well placed to build on some of the good work that has happened. To really, what I see, Tony, is like normalize the situation. As I said, if you look at all the other stakeholders in the game, the players, the managers, the supporters, the medics, they've all got their own active association, working to protect their work, and that's exactly what we want to do.
Great stuff.
Should we give it another few seconds and then share it?
Yeah, give it up to 20 seconds, another 20 seconds, just to get your answers in. So what we're looking at here, it's looking like meeting with other agents and industry professionals.
One thing I forgot, I was going to ask Dan there, that how much actually British clubs have relied on foreign territories for as buyers, and actually what we saw in January is the MLS coming through as well.
Yeah.
A couple of really big, Latte Lat was it Atlanta he went to?
Yeah.
Right, should we stop it there?
Yeah, just stop it there, Ryan. Yeah, and share the results. So we've got our meeting with other agents and industry professionals. Obviously, this is online. We're going to have one, an actual meeting, in-person event for the football, the FIFA licensed football agents, and some of obviously the board. You'll get a chance to meet the board as well. I'm sort of thinking we might have a couple of small events if that's practically possible, and if that's what the membership wants. And again, I probably keep hammering on this point, but if you've got ideas and you want to get involved and there's something that you'd like to do or to host or to run, that by all means we're open to that. So what are the top ones here, Ryan? Meeting with other agents was top. Support, advice, and guidance.
Advice and guidance.
And if that support and advice and guidance comes from a lawyer or somebody else, in whatever the topic is, or somebody from FIFA or somebody from the FA, we'll try and get those people to give us that.
I think that's right, Tony. I think that's replicating the best practice out of other, not just even football-based associations. Other people might be attached to other unions and associations, and I think what we want to do is be able to provide bespoke support for what is a fairly complicated industry at the moment.
Well, that first poll said understanding and abiding by the complex rules and regulations. So providing information is another great thing for the association to be doing. Yeah, and those were the top three, weren't they?
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, we'll email out with the links to join again over the next day or so. And really looking forward to hopefully as many of you as possible coming on board. Tony, I really enjoyed that, and we've done right the 2 hours, bang on the 2 hours. But I'll leave the final word to yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ryan. And look, thank you to Roberto. Very important to have Roberto on. Many thanks to Dan as well. Always does a great job, Dan. And look, thank you to you for tuning in and listening to this webinar. Hopefully, we'll get a lot of sign-ups, a lot of board members from this, and see you at the next meeting, which was, what did we say, the 21st of May, Ryan, which I'll be writing out to everyone who's attended this webinar. So thanks very much.
Yeah, one quick question. Has the next Football Transfer Forum been announced? It has.
It has. It's getting a soft launch. It's probably going to be fully launched next week. It's the 1st of May, Thursday the 1st of May at Villa Park. So if you're in Birmingham or if you want to travel to Birmingham, I know Ryan's happy, but we're on the wrong side of Birmingham for you, aren't we?
We're nowhere near where I want us to be.
Listen, guys, thanks ever so much for watching, and we'll be in touch.
See you guys. Take care.
Thanks, Ryan. Cheers, mate.